That's Mount Ogden. The other side's this Whipping downhill. That's the church I grew up in. That's the Leslie Hodgson School. I got a lot of reading to do here. This is a big, long book. We'll get plenty of great shots of this great vista in front of this here. We'll get a lot of them. The bus would stop, driven by Ferris Green. My father hated him. My dad had drafted in Marine in 1954, a ripped, dark-haired, eyed, 5'9" man who looked something right out of a movie. Looked just like Elvis Presley with muzzles, charismatic, dynamic, a wit like Twain, humor like Johnny Carson, and a gambler, a good gambler, a dark Dane, as half the family were blonde-haired, blue-eyed as you can get, and the other half dark-haired, dark-skinned, dark eyes, dark Danes. My mother, Margene Hunsaker, the middle daughter of Abraham Hunsaker IV, the famous Hunsaker line, the line that had died with no oldest son, birthed by my grandmother, Ella Potter Hunsaker, to be named Abraham Hunsaker VI. My mother, a very beautiful dark female, with curves, and pin-up artist that could draw like a camera, who would recite whole books of Poe out of her incredible mind. My oldest sister, dark like my father and my mother. Karen and I, my twin sister, blue-eyed and blonde-haired as it gets. My 1 year younger brother, Brad, like Karen and I, blonde-haired and blue-eyed as it gets. I always remember being very young and being at one of Ogden's many great ice cream parlors in Ogden. Ogden had dozens of them. And a woman coming up to my mom who looked like something out of a 1964 magazine ad, with her head pinned up in her soft cotton simple dress and high heels, a very petite woman with tiny waist and curves. My mother, as many Ogden women, were something out of a Madison Avenue photo shoot. The women looked at these three of us, Karen, Brad, and I, and said, the triplets, oh, they are right out of a John Christian Andersen drawing. I love to cut the bottom off my pants to hit me right in the middle of my calf then, and I still do. I call them Huck Fins by Blanch. Everybody knows that that's what I wear. My mom said they are not triplets. The tall one is the younger one. Then the twins, which I later found out our last name was adopted. Our real last name was Anderson or Mickelson. It's Mickelson. Danes. As I would stare out the window in West Weber in 1964, the girls wore dresses. It was the law. It was the 1960s. Not to the ankle. Mormon dresses. Oh no, this was Ogden, not Salt Lake. This was the great cosmopolitan anti-Mormon surrounded by Mormon immigrant farming communities to all sides, Huntsville and Eden and Liberty. And east, Harrisville, North Ogden. To the north, South Weber, South Ogden. You went it to the south, and then the large open spaces, farming spaces to the west. Slaterville, Wilson, Marriott, Taylor, West Weber, West Warren, and right to the north of the great sweeping bend in the Weber River at a 1930 planned community embedded in the middle of the old farming community of Far West, Plain City. A suburbanite small community with a bar, a store, a town center, and a planned small lots with early suburbanites. The only suburbanites in the entire county, a large ground county. Weber County stretched from the top of Monte Cristo, atop the great Rocky Mountain peaks of the mighty Wasatch, 10,000 foot, winding up Highway 39, over the top of the Grand Peaks, to Wyoming, down through Huntsville, Highway 39, around the great man-made mountain recreational lake, Pine View Reservoir, right next to Snow Basin. As you slide down the back side of Mount Ogden, while skiing or visiting Snow Basin, you stare right at the great Pine View Reservoir. Then down the great 7-mile stretch of Ogden Canyon, I believe to be the most beautiful canyon in America, past the Oaks, past a Leslie Hodgson mansion or two, down to the mouth of Ogden Canyon, to Rainbow Gardens, the great hot springs, swimming pools, natural heating. In 1964, the great shops and indoor and outdoor swimming pools, and the great food. Down 12th Street, Highway 39, past 12th and Washington. In 1964, the great Weber High School, down past 12th and Wall, a huge farmer's produce stand. Down past Marriott J's old house, to the top of the dead end hill, 39th stop. Then left turn to Wilson and hang a right down the old concrete, very noisy road, down through Wilson, then through Taylor to 4700, my road. Back to a mile to my house, just a half mile from the corner of Highway 39 and 700 West. As Weber County still continues west of the Blanch Farm. A west turn over the river to the West Warren, straight out, all the way to the lake, only a few hundred yards from our house, the great Weber River Delta, pouring into the mighty lake, taking most of the land, a battle between the scrap farmer, who was not early enough to get the great fruits, flat lake bed land, and would try to cheat the life from the great deltas by draining the marshes and fight the great natural delta to turn the ascetic lake bed into farm ground. Then to the lake, to the edge of the lake, what we as children, as the Leslie Hodson, Marriner, Eccles, W.P. Masterpiece, West Weber Elementary, where taught us the causeway, the eighth wonder of the world. Mrs. Smith was my second grade teacher, the wife of the great educator, T.O. Smith. She was brilliant. She would call the great Union Pacific Causeway the incredible 1904 structure built from the old growth timber that nearly destroyed the old redwood forest of California, the only redwood forest in the world, a wood structure that allowed 30 locomotives a day to travel 12 miles over the top of the Great Salt Lake. With no bedrock floor, the timber fused together 400 feet into the ascetic black ancient mud. If you stood on the horizon on a boat, as I did many times, you could see the curvature of the earth, the flat bridge spanning over the great ascetic lake and the calm water. In the winter, blue-gray, in the summer, brilliant red water, as the palette was extremely dramatic and beautiful. Right to the end of 12th Street, at the beginning of the causeways, was Fremont Island. As I was standing at the top of our grand, huge barn, my grandpa had built Leonard Blanch. It was so visual, exceptional as a child because it looked like a big emerging submarine, Fremont Island, in the Great Salt Lake, and Miss Smith would call it Submarine Island. At the top of the very old rock formation that protrudes out of the smooth, soft-looking brown grass that has James Fremont and Jim Bridger's name carved on it. The said submarine-looking Fremont Island, the Mormons exiled the great grave robber, John the Baptist, as they called him, as he called himself, with a ball and chain, all alone. Still a great Mormon tale. Is it true when they went back out there the next year they found was the ball and chain and no sign of the grave robber? On the backside of Little Mountain, as the very first Weber Countyans residents thousands of years ago lived in caves. As we call the lake breaks and creates surf and looks and feels very much like Northern California coastline, a very secret military institution at the end of the road, which no one to this day seems to tell anyone who it really is or what is really there. My father would always say it is the first defense West Coast Eastern Great Basin missile silo. Who knows? I know as a boy I had been chased out of there by a helicopter and interrogated more than once. Right to the north of the west end of the great Union Pacific Causeway, Promontory Point, where the east met the west, the Golden Spike, which transformed Ogden to the greatest railroad city of all time. Ogden, 50,000 passengers a day, passing through the great Ogden Union Station in 1964. All the lines met in Ogden, 25th Street. The street was an early vision of the Las Vegas gambling, prostitution, jazz, the Electric Alley. The street that was the great writer wrote that in World War I, the soldier from the trenches in France in 1917 wrote to his friend and could not remember the name of the city or the state, simply wrote 25th Street, USA. It arrived on time. The great said street of the east of the Union Station, to the west, the old brick Gothic, very Gothic viaduct, traveling over the greatest rail yard in the world, over the top of dozens and dozens of rail lines, hundreds of locomotives, thousands and thousands of rail cars. At the end of the viaduct, the great slaughter buildings, houses, the Swift companies, hundreds and thousands of meat cutters. Ogden in 1964, a Union town, a hardcore dug-in Democratic stronghold. No Republican stood a chance of election here. Right over the viaduct hung a sharp right at 24th Street. Bernard DeVuto grew up on the street. Marriner Eccles lived and worked on the street. John Browning invented the automatic gun. The street Wattis, the builder of Hoover Dam, lived on the street. Leslie Hodson lived on. Hung a sharp right at Richardson Market, down the hill, past the red and white checkerboard silos of Marriner. There it was, the two grand structures of the American cattle industry, both again Leslie Hodson structures. The historical Ogden Coliseum and the Exchange Building. All the livestock in the Rocky Mountain region, the great cattle ranching states of the 20th century, went to market here, all of them. This is where all the rail lines came together. The two great rivers, the Weber and the Ogden, would join just a mile down the Weber River, the great forts of Goodyear and Fremont and Bonaventura, right here, there. The blood would flow into the Great Weber, one of the great rainbow and brown trout rivers in the world in 1964, as was the Ogden. Thousands and thousands of traders, ranchers, farmers, speculators descending in Utah around the two great meat livestock industries, Art Deco, brown, red brick like landscape building, millions of dollars of cash, suitcases of cash, being traded in the new futures tables of Ogden. The road would slither down the river cove to Wilson Lane, an old Mormon road with an old aesthetic house and an old aesthetic house and an old white church and a very old historic school in ruins along the road. At the end of the Wilson Lane was the greatest two feedlots in 1964 that panned miles, literally miles along 1900 West. Mountains of cow shit, towering mountains of manure in 1964. This is how we would travel to Ogden in my father's pickup in his 1964 Impala station wagon. My curved up petite artist mother and her 4 children in 4 years. They were Mormons, liberal progressive Mormons, yes, but still Mormons. This was the 1960s. Ogden's Pillsbury great grain silo stood right at the top of the great Cattle Coliseum Exchange building. Del Monte's massive tomato processing plant, towering green water tower, towering above the Coliseum at the west of the turn of the right was the great amalgamated sugar beet factory, the grand old smokestack, and in the fall, mountains of dumped sugar beets, towering mountains, millions and millions of piled up sugar beets waiting to be processed. One of Marriner Eccles, the son of David Eccles, the father of demand-side economics, the originator of the Fed, the modern-day Fed, and the WPA, the inventor of FDR's economic policies and demand-side economics, long before John Maynard Keynes ever wrote any book, the Masonic brain, the great economist himself, who everything he ever touched turned to gold, entire future chapter. Right across from the sugar factory, which my father worked part-time, was Pete's Cafe. My mother's Aunt Ruby ran Pete's. It was a bar and a cafe together. Everyone in the area congregated there. They ate there, they drank there, they socialized there. 3-year-olds to 100 years old. Just a few hundred feet, the old Taylor concrete route to Taylor, West Weber, and West Warren. At that point, you were traveling from West Weber. You made the choice to go over the 1 mile to 12th Street, Highway 39, or go to 24th Street, where all the commerce and business was. 24th and 25th Streets, banking, shopping, drinking, sex, socialized. But you had to travel through the stockyard, and there were thousands and thousands of people and vehicles there. It was a tiny 2-lane stretch of road. It could be extremely congested, and you may not get through. But if you took 12th Street, no viaduct over the rail lines, and the trains from the north would back up sometimes for hours, and there was no way out of the rail crossing into the north. At the 12th Street rail line was my grandmother's family old farm, row croppers, watermelons, cantaloupes, tomatoes, peas. Adelia and Myra Tracy Blanch, what an incredible woman. It had been eminent domain in the 1920s or 30s for the building of the Army Depot and the prisoner of war facility during World War II. So there was no getting around the stoppage of the backed up trains. To the west of the Massey Army Depot, 300 acres, was Walquist Junior High School, another Hodson masterpiece. So when my mother would go into Ogden with her pulled-up hair, cat-eye glasses, simple cotton dress, and high heels. With her 4 small children, it was a gamble. Do we take the chances and go up the Stockyard Road, or we take our chance to go up 12th Street and get backed up from the trains? She always chose the Stockyard route. I later in life understood why she always chose the 24th Street route, so she could drive by Pete's to keep an eye on my father to see if he was there.